4 days, 6 bodies, and the killer stayed on the farm, milking cows, eating bread, and sleeping in the attic above the corpses. No forced entry, and no missing money. No escape route, just a locked door and silence. This is Hinterkaifeck. Don't forget to follow us on social media. Just search for The Michael Braa Show on Insta, Facebook, YouTube, or the KC CBS 47 Plus app. Welcome to The Michael Braa Show. Today's case is one of the most disturbing and enduring mysteries in criminal history, the Hinterkaifeck murders. Germany, 1922. In the Bavarian countryside, 6 people were slaughtered on a remote farm. The victims included Andreas and Cecilia Gruber, their widowed daughter Victoria, her 2 young children, and the family's new maid, Maria Baumgartner. All were killed with a mattock, a farming tool. 4 of them were stacked like lumber in the barn, covered only with hay. The other 2 were murdered inside the house. The youngest was just 2 years old. But the most chilling part? The killer didn't flee. For days, someone lived among the corpses. They ate meals from the kitchen. They fed the animals. They burned something in the oven. They even tore calendar to a new day. And when they disappeared, it was without a trace. No valuables were taken. No one heard screams. No one saw the killer leave. In fact, footprints were found heading toward the house, but none leading away. Before the murders, the Grubers told neighbors they heard footsteps in the attic. A newspaper showed up on the property that no one subscribed to. A house key went missing, and the previous maid had quit, convinced the house was haunted. The official investigation was sloppy. The crime scene was compromised and evidence was destroyed. The victims' skulls were removed and later lost in World War II. But to this day, no one's been arrested. Over the next few minutes, we'll walk through the crime, examine the clues, profile the suspects, and ask the question that has haunted Germany for more than a century. Who killed the Grubers? Why did they stay? The Hinterkaifeck farm was about as remote as it gets. Tucked behind a small village in Bavaria, surrounded by forest, nearly a mile from the nearest neighbor. In 1922, it was home to 63-year-old Andreas Gruber, his wife, Cecilia, their widowed daughter, Victoria, and 2 children, 7-year-old Cecilia and 2-year-old Joseph, and their brand new maid, Maria Baumgartner. She arrived on March 31st. That night, she was murdered. The crime was discovered 4 days later, on April 4th, when concerned neighbors went to the farm. They found all 6 members of the house dead. 4 of them, Andreas, his wife, Victoria, and little Cecilia, were piled in hay in the barn. Maria was killed in the room, and Joseph found dead in his crib, covered with one of Victoria's dresses. Each victim had been struck in the head with a mattock, a heavy pick-like axe tool used on the farm. Some were strangled, and some had their skulls caved in. 7-year-old Cecilia likely survived for hours, tearing out her own hair in pain. No valuables were taken, and no evidence of sexual assault, no sign of a struggle. The killer didn't ransack the house. Instead, they stayed. Someone remained on the farm for days after the murders. The cows were milked, the chickens fed, food was eaten from the kitchen, and fresh smoke was seen rising from the chimney. Bread had been baked, a calendar page had been torn off and replaced. And perhaps most disturbing, there were no footprints leading away from the farm, but there had been footprints coming in. Days before the murders, Andreas had found strange tracks in the snow, leading from the woods towards the machine room, but none leading back. He told neighbors he'd heard footsteps in the attic, and he found a newspaper on the property no one recognized. Victoria said a key had gone missing. The previous maid had quit months earlier, claiming the place was haunted. And on the night of the murders, it is believed the killer lured each victim out into the barn, one by one. The last to die were Maria and the baby Joseph. When police arrived, they failed to secure the scene. Villagers had already trampled the barn, curious onlookers had cooked in the kitchen, the autopsies were done in the barn. The skulls of the victims were removed and never seen again. 6 people were murdered, and the killer, well, he stayed for a while and then he vanished. When authorities arrived at Hinterkaifeck, it was already too late. The crime scene had been compromised. Villagers had entered the barn, touched the bodies, and even baked bread in the family's oven. No perimeter was set. No evidence was preserved. Investigators from nearby towns and even eventually Munich did what they could. They confirmed that the victims had all died from blows to the head with a blunt object. Later, that was determined to be a mattock. It's a tool belonging to Andreas Gruber. But at the time, the murder weapon was missing. Now, early theories centered on robbery. That was quickly ruled out. Large sums of money were found untouched, and nothing was stolen. Whatever this was, it wasn't a burglary gone wrong. Instead, the details began pointing towards something far more disturbing. The barn was sealed from the inside. There was no signs of forced entry, and a few days earlier, Andreas had complained about a set of footprints in the snow leading to the machine room. None headed back. There were also the noises in the attic. One of the house keys had gone missing, and after the murders, someone had fed livestock, milked the cows, and kept fires going in the stove. This wasn't a quick crime of opportunity. Whoever did this had stayed. The medical examiner performed autopsies on the barn itself. Each skull was removed and sent to Munich for further analysis, including, in a sign of the time, a review by clairvoyants. But those skulls were lost during World War II and never returned. A young mechanic named Albert Hofner came to the farm on April 4th to repair a piece of equipment. He spent over 4 hours on the property, saw no one, and only heard the dog barking and animals stirring. Killer may have still been inside. That same afternoon, Lorenz Schlittenbauer, a neighbor and former lover of Victoria and rumored father to baby Joseph, led the search party that finally entered the farm. When others hesitated, he unlocked the door and went in alone. According to some reports, he used a key, but that key had been missing for days. He found the bodies, he moved them, and he was strangely calm. And years later, he mentioned details that no one had ever made public, like the condition of the soil where the bodies lay. Schlittenbauer became prime suspect, but without forensic evidence, no arrest was ever made. Police interviewed dozens of people, former workers, neighbors, suspects with criminal records. A few surfaced repeatedly, like the Bichler brothers, the Thalers, farmhand named George Siegel. All had potential motive. All were eventually cleared. The killer had left no fingerprints, no note, and no trail. And so just weeks after the most brutal crime in Bavarian history, the official investigation began to stall, buried under rumor, secrecy, and silence. The Hinterkaifeck case has spawned nearly a century of speculation. Dozens of suspects were interviewed. None charged, but a few names rise to the surface again and again. And the first is, of course, the man who discovered the crime, Lorenz Schlittenbauer. He was the Gruber's neighbor, a widower, and believed by many to be the father of Victoria's youngest child, Joseph. Their relationship had soured months before the murders. Lorenz initially acknowledged paternity and even paid support, but later he withdrew the claim. Some say Andreas Gruber forced him out of Victoria's life. Others believe it was much more complicated. On April 4th, Lorenz opened the farm before the others. He unlocked the front door, and that's important, because one of the keys had gone missing days earlier, and when police arrived, all the doors were locked from the inside. Witnesses say Schlittenbauer moved the bodies, showed no emotion, and shared details later that hadn't been released publicly. Years afterwards, he allegedly commented on the frozen ground beneath the corpses. something only the killer would have known. Lorenz maintained his innocence for the rest of his life. He even sued the neighbors accusing him, but many locals believed he had motive, opportunity, and inside knowledge. Others pointed to the Bichler brothers, Antoine and Carl. They had both worked at Hinterkaifeck. A former maid told police that the normally aggressive farm dog never barked at Anton. She also claimed he once said the family deserved to die. They were familiar with the layout of the property, and some believe they intended to rob the family, but something went wrong. The Thaler brothers, also suspected burglars, were seen near the property in the woods before the crime. One had reportedly asked where each member of the household slept. Another theory centers around a former farmhand named George Siegel. He knew where the murder weapon was stored, and later admitted to stealing tools from the farmhouse in the past. Still others, they blamed Victoria's late husband, Carl Gabriel. Although presumed killed in World War I, his body was never found. Some claim he faked his death, returned home, and killed the family in a jealous rage. That theory was largely dismissed. And then there's the outsider theory, a serial killer, possibly a drifter or a war veteran. In 2017, American author Bill James proposed that the murders matched the signature of a man suspected in a string of family killings across the United States. The idea? He came to Germany, found Hinterkaifeck, and repeated his pattern. All these theories, each plausible, none proven. There was no confession, no physical evidence, no surviving witnesses with a clear memory of that night. And so, the suspects became shadows, ghosts in the snow, footsteps without a trail. When modern profiles look at a case like Hinterkaifeck, they start with behavior, sequence, timing, control. Mia, our investigative AI, reconstructs this crime not from gossip or rumor, but from pattern, probability, and known facts. The first red flag is control. Whoever committed these murders didn't panic. He lured 4 people, one by one, into the barn. That takes familiarity and comfort, plus authority. You don't coax victims into the cold night unless they trust you or fear you. When we return, what happens when a whole community looks the other way? A former maid said the attic was haunted. Footsteps were heard. Keys went missing. Smoke rose from the chimney. So why did no one act until it was too late? That's next on The Michael Braa Show.
Hi, I'm Sparkle Sugin, and I am the host of the Everything Sparkle Show. I would like to invite you to come and hang out with me every Thursday at 4 p.m. Pacific Time, 7 p.m. Eastern Time, as I interview the world one guest at a time. Everything Sparkle is available on Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire TV, Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, and CMAC.tv. Plus, if you're in the Central California area, you can watch on Comcast Xfinity Channel 93 or AT&T Uverse Channel 99. Hope to see you there.
Trust. It's hard to get and easy to lose. When the risk of loss is great and people are hurting, who do you trust? How about the people trusted by the biggest names in business, agriculture, and government? Atlanta's Private Investigations, building trust one case at a time.
I'm Michael, founder of Atlanta's Private Investigations. Let's talk. When you need help, your answers are here.
You ever get that weird feeling like somebody's watching you, but you're alone? Like the remote's in a different spot than where you left it, or the leftovers are mysteriously missing, or the light in the attic is on, and you know you didn't go up there. Well, surprise, it might not be a ghost. It might just be a Phrogger. I'm Kara, and this is Kara's Corner. I don't mean Phrogger like the video game. Frogging with a PH is the real-life horror story of people secretly living inside your home without you knowing. Not a roommate, not a tenant. Just a stranger secretly squatting and living in your house without you knowing. In the Hinterkaifeck murders, the family heard footsteps in their attic for days before they were murdered. The previous maid quit because she thought the house was haunted. And after the murders, the killer stayed. He milked the cows, he fed the chickens, he baked the bread, and lived amongst the corpses for days. But the wild part? This happens in real life. There are real cases of people secretly living in homes, Vents, closets, attics, even under the bed. But one of the creepiest? Denver, 1941. A man named Theodore Conies broke into his old acquaintance's home and hid in the attic for weeks. He only came out when the coast was clear, until one day, the homeowner, Philip Peters, came back unexpectedly. Conies beat him to death, and then crawled right back into the attic. For months, no one could figure it out. Doors were locked. Nothing was stolen. People even started saying the house was haunted. But the truth? The killer had been living just a few feet above their heads the entire time. Eating, hiding, and watching, even while police searched below. In Japan, a man kept noticing his food was going missing, so he set up a camera. What he found? A woman had been secretly living in the top cabinet of his kitchen for over a year. She'd sneak out when he left for work to eat and shower and then crawl right back in. So yeah, maybe that bump in the night isn't a ghost. It's just someone living in your attic, rent-free. Frogging is real, and it's terrifying. But unlike ghost stories, this one has a paper trail. Real cases, real victims. And in Hinterkaifeck, it may have been the first documented case of frogging, with deadly consequences. So next time something goes missing, or you hear something above you, don't just laugh it off. Because haunted houses might be fake, but froggers, they're real. That's all I got for today. Thank you guys for coming to Chaos Corner, and I'll see you next time.
The attack itself was violent, but not disorganized. Repeated, targeted blows to the head. Most of the victims were covered after death, a classic sign of either remorse or personal connection. Some were strangled first. One child survived for hours. That means the killer stayed with the bodies. Then comes the aftermath. The animals were fed, the cows were milked, the oven was used, food was eaten, the dog was tied up. Someone maintained the property while corpses rotted in the next room. That level of psychological detachment, paired with domestic routine, narrows the profile significantly. Mia rules out opportunistic criminals. A vagrant doesn't feed your chickens, and a thief doesn't bake bread before vanishing into the woods. No, this killer knew the victims. He had time, he wasn't afraid. And the key? The house was locked from the inside. Yet Schlittenbauer opened the door. Either he had that key or he never needed one. Mia flagged several behaviors from Schlittenbauer that align with the classic post-crime management. Leading the discovery party, controlling access to the scene, moving bodies, offering unsolicited details. His motive? A contested child, a failed relationship, a loss of social standing, all potentially cataclysmic. That make him guilty? No, but it puts him in striking distance of the probability. The Bitchlers, the Thaler's, even the serial killer theory, they have holes. But Schlittenbauer's profile fits the behavior, the psychology, and the pacing. Mia's conclusion is simple. The killer was not a stranger. The killer was not in a rush. The killer believed the house was his. And for at least 3 nights, it was. For decades, Hinterkaifeck was just a story, a cold case, a dark piece of Bavarian folklore. But in 2007, it came back to life. That year, a group of 15 students at the German Police Academy reopened the case as part of a cold case study. They weren't working from rumors or documentaries. They had access to the original files, crime scene sketches, autopsy reports, and photos. Their goal was simple: apply modern profiling and investigative methods to a centuries-old crime. They created a digital 3D model of the crime scene, reanalyzed witness testimony, and reconstructed timelines. They reviewed the behavior patterns, the post-murder activity, and the physical layout of the farm. When it was all over, all 15 students reached the same conclusion, the same suspect, and the same theory, the same name. But here's the twist. They didn't publish it. Out of respect for the decedents, the name was withheld. Still, we know who it was. The evidence points overwhelmingly to Lorenz Schlittenbauer. He had motive, a child he might not have wanted, a public rejection by Victoria, and a humiliation in a deeply conservative village. He had the means, he lived close by, he knew the layout, and was familiar with the animals, and he had no alibi for the time of the murders. He had behavior that raised red flags, entering the home alone, unlocking a door that was supposed to be locked, moving the bodies, and years later, sharing details no one else could have known. The students' reinvestigation also explored something chilling, the idea that the killer might have been left-handed. Based on wound angles and skull trauma, it's plausible. Was Schlittenbauer left-handed? Well, that's still unclear, but the match to his behavioral profile remained strong. Forensic testing wasn't possible. The skulls were lost in World War II, and the murder weapon, eventually found in the attic, was never preserved. The scene had been compromised. But even without DNA, blood samples, fingerprints, the case has all but been solved in the court of investigative logic. And yet, officially, the file remains open, unsolved, a historical curiosity with no former closure. Other revelations have surfaced over the years. Deathbed confessions, lost letters, alleged sightings. Nothing's been confirmed. Nothing has certainly led to charges. The only lasting outcome of the 2007 investigation was this: a consensus that whoever killed the Gruber family didn't come from the woods. He came from next door. And when he walked back into town, no one stopped him. Hinterkaifeck didn't just expose a murder, it exposed a silence. The footprints in the snow, the noises in the attic, the missing key, the barking dog, smoke from the chimney, well after the family had died. And still, nobody came. Not because they didn't care, but because they didn't want to get involved. In 1922, Bavaria was a world where privacy was sacred. What happened behind closed doors, especially on an isolated farm, wasn't questioned. Even when those doors creaked at night, even when they stopped opening altogether. The former maid had quit because she thought the house was haunted. She heard footsteps above her when her family was downstairs. Andre Gruber dismissed it. So did everyone else. Weeks later, her replacement arrived. She lasted one night. The school teacher noticed when young Shasila didn't show up for class. The church noticed Victoria's absence from the choir. Then the mail began to pile up. And still, it took 4 days before anyone checked the property. And when they did, they found the animals fed, the stove warm. The killer not only stayed, he lived among the bodies. And there's a lesson here, and it isn't about murder. It's about the warning signs we chose to ignore. This case haunts not just because it's unsolved, but because it could have been prevented. There were cracks, there were signals and sounds. One by one, they're each brushed aside. And even today, the same thing happens. A child doesn't show up to school. A neighbor's lights are off for too long. And someone hears something go bump in the attic, but chooses not to knock. In cities, it's the apartment where no one answers the door. And in the suburbs, it's the back door the backyard where the grass grows wild. In small towns, it's the family everyone whispers about, but never confronts. We all have a Hinterkaifeck. Sometimes it's a house, sometimes it's a person, and sometimes it's a feeling. We tell ourselves it's none of our business, but silence doesn't protect people, it protects predators. At Hinterkaifeck, the silence cost 6 lives. And it doesn't end with the murders. Afterward, the community turned inward. Distrust festered. People pointed fingers but shared nothing of value. Witnesses held back and rumors spread. The killer wasn't just someone with a weapon. The killer was also a culture that allowed the weapon to be raised again and again behind closed doors. And then there's the incest between Andreas and Victoria. Public record and a conviction. But no one intervened. No one removed the children. Maybe the killer acted out of rage. Maybe out of revenge. Maybe out of something darker. What happened at Hinterkaifeck wasn't just violence. It was tolerated violence. It was delayed accountability, deferred judgment. A century later, we still don't know who did it, but we do know how it happened. And if we're honest, we know how it could happen again. Not just in a remote Bavarian farmhouse, but anywhere that silence thrives. That's the echo of Hinterkaifeck. Not the scream in the night, but the choice not to answer it. There is no twist ending here. No surprise confession, no hidden clue we all missed. A Hinterkaifeck doesn't offer justice. It doesn't even offer clarity. What it gives us is a graveyard. 6 people buried without their skulls. A farmhouse burned down into memory. A trail that leads into the dark and doesn't come back. This isn't the kind of story you solve with a fresh set of eyes or a clever theory on the internet. There is no final clue waiting to be discovered. No family diary in the attic, no fingerprint overlooked. The killer is dead. The witnesses are dead. And the evidence is all gone. The silence won. That's the part that stays with you. Not the gore, not the mystery. The emptiness. Because we all want the monster to be caught. We want a face. We want a name and a reason. We want something to say. This is who did it. And when we don't get that, we start making things up. Ghosts, curses, serial killers from across the sea. But maybe the scariest answer is also the simplest. We don't get to know. And maybe we never did. A Hinterkaifeck wasn't a locked room puzzle. It was a quiet collapse. A family already broken, torn the rest of the way apart. Not just by the killer, but by the world around him. What was tolerated, ignored, and eventually dismissed. And for all the horror, the truth is, this didn't shake the world. It barely shook a village. No one marched, no reforms followed, and there was no reckoning. Just a cleanup crew. A short funeral and a few layers of frost on the ground. There's no redemption in this arc. No legacy to reclaim, no justice to pursue. The killer stayed for 3 nights, then disappeared, and the world moved on. 100 years later, the names are fading. The crime is still taught in police academies, but only as a failure. The old-timers have even stopped talking about it. And even the shrine out there past the trees feels more like a warning than a memorial. And if there's anything to take from Hinterkaifeck, it's this. Not every story ends. Some of them just get quiet, and then they freeze. And then they're gone.